So if we want to talk about the life cycle of a security project. So let's say that this is my life cycle here, and down here in the bottom left-hand corner, I have this idea, or this, the light bulb kind of goes off, and the light bulb really means that somebody somewhere may have some funding that allows us to now invoke in this process to hopefully move either the piece of software, the piece of hardware, the system down the road, and allows us to work in teams to build this piece of equipment or this widget for whoever our customer is. And it comes in handy because at first we come up with what typically is referred to as a prototype. And so the prototype usually is, once the idea, you design a prototype, and then after you design a prototype, now we begin to seek funding for it. And with the intent that there's hopefully going to be somebody out there that's going to pay for this particular component or software system that we're developing. From that, once we have procured the funding for this widget that we're creating, now we have to dig a little bit deeper and get into what's called a preliminary design review. And this preliminary design review, or PDR for short, allows us to really scope out any requirements, functional requirements, structural requirements, security requirements, and allows us as almost like a gate to move to the next gate in the cycle of development of a product. And so when we're talking about frameworks, correlating frameworks back into the development process is really what it's about. Next, we jump into what's called a critical design review, or a CDR. And that CDR really is the final gate for us as engineers to shore up any of the different types of requirements that need to be met in order for us to give the customer what they absolutely want. And so typically we don't start to write software or build the actual components until we receive approval at the CDR. Next, once we receive approval, so I'm going to write over here right next to this, I'll say, so receive approval. So once we receive approval of the requirements, then we typically can march and begin to code and begin to build and move closer to awesomeness until we get to a point where we're ready for the test readiness review. And this test readiness review, or the TRR, really is an acceptance test that allows us to hopefully be able to what's called a formal qualification test, or an FQT. So the FQT means that you have people that have not been involved in your project, that you throw it over the fence to them, and essentially they have no interest in your project other than you're hiring them as maybe another section or division within your bigger organization. But essentially they've never seen it before. They're just taking the requirements and seeing if what they're testing matched up with the requirements, or does it even work? Does the functionality work? So essentially, it's a third-party assessment of that tool or that solution with the intent that hopefully it passes. And finally, we get to a point where if it does pass that, we get to what's called the operational readiness review. And this operational readiness review, or ORR, means that everyone who has been involved or needs to be involved, needs to be made aware that we're getting ready to push this bad boy or to push this solution into production, that every team that could be potentially contacted by anybody that's using the system needs to be notified. And so that's like the help desk, that's the application support, that is the server people, that's DNS, if it's going to an external entity. So really everybody who could possibly be touched by this particular implementation needs to be included and made sure that they have a frequently asked question document that will allow them to hopefully field any phone calls that they receive. And by doing that, it allows them to really have a checkout almost. Like, hey, we've contacted the help desk, they're good to go. We've contacted the support team over here, they're good to go. We've contacted management, they say we're good to go. So it's basically a functional checkout that allows us to say we're ready for prime time and push this into the production environment. After you have gotten through the operational readiness review, or ORR, we get into what is called, or typically called, something like an operation and maintenance mode. Maintenance, yeah, I think that's right. An O&M mode. And the O&M mode allows us to, or puts us in a position where we can now move, and it's in production.